Hi, hello, welcome back. Happy Pride Month. It's June, the month to be gay and be merry. I figured I had to start off Pride Month with some queer book recommendations, but hopefully some queer book recommendations that you might not have heard of before. I know what I've titled this video. I know it's going to be something along the lines of queer books that you probably haven't heard of, queer book recommendations that you haven't heard before. You might have heard of some of these, okay? Like, I'm not claiming to have pulled books out of thin air that didn't exist before I'm making this video. I'm just claiming that these are some queer books that I've read and I've loved that I don't really see recommended around on the internet. And so if you are deep in book talk, deep in booktube, deep in bookstagram, you might have heard of some of these. If you're more of like a casual reader, a casual queer books reader, then maybe I can introduce you to some books that you might not have heard of before, and that's wonderful. Full disclosure, I have 6 books I want to recommend to you today, and all 6 are either gay books or lesbian books. I did want to diversify this and include some books about trans people, about asexuality or any other part of the LGBTQ spectrum. But honestly, there just aren't many out there at the moment, and if they are out there, they're being recommended left, right and centre, which didn't really fit with the vibe of this video. So these are just gay and lesbian books, but please, if you have any recommendations of any books featuring transgender characters, or the main story is about transgender characters or asexuality, or anything else on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, then please do recommend them to me down below. I do want to diversify more. I always just lean towards the sapphic fiction, the WLW, lesbian, bisexual books, because that is who I am. That's the representation that I like to read about, and I'm not going to apologise for that, but I'm up for diversifying my reading. I want to start with a book that I've never seen anyone else on the internet talk about. Nobody's ever recommended this to me, and it's one of the very first queer books that I read, so it has quite a special place in my heart, and that is Georgia Peaches and Other Forbidden Fruit by J. Robin Brown. I can't remember how I ended up picking this up. I have literally had this on my bookshelf for maybe 6 or 7 years now. Like I said, it was one of the very first sapphic books I read, and it's a coming out sort of religious trauma kind of situation here. I'm going to keep all these recommendations as spoiler free as possible, but I do want to give you an overview of each of the stories so you can decide if you want to read them or not. So our main character, our protagonist in this book is Jo. She is the daughter of a evangelical radio preacher, but she's always been out. So Jo is a lesbian. She has always been out for a very long time to her friends and family, and all is good. No big problems here. She lives in a big city in Georgia. I think she lives in Athens. And then for her senior year, the family have got to up and move to a smaller town called Rome. And her always very accepting father comes to her and is like, listen, we need you to just pop back in the closet for a year whilst you're in Rome. So go do that for us. So she does. They move to Rome. She can't be out. Only then, of course, she meets a girl who she wants to be with. And from there, it's just an unravelling of the going back in the closet kind of situation. This book is quite strong from the religion perspective. Even Jo herself, although she is dealing with a lot of religion-based homophobia, she is very strong in her faith. She is Christian herself, which I did find really interesting reading it, because a lot of the time you will read about these coming out storylines, or somebody's dealing with a lot of religious hatreds, but they're not religious themselves, and I found it really interesting in this that Jo is religious. Which I thought was just an interesting angle. Not gonna lie to you, I did read this book 7 years ago now. It was really special to me at the time. I remember feeling really seen. There weren't many sort of sapphic lesbian books out there on the shelves. This is one of very few. I can't tell you loads more about it because again, I did read it 7 years ago, but I just know it was really special to me at the time, and I've never heard anyone else talk about it. So maybe give it a go. Let me know what you think. And then we're going to go in the total opposite direction with a book that is a brand new release. This is Sorry Bro by Talene Vascuni. This has only been out maybe a couple of months, and I only finished reading this about 2 days ago, so this story is very fresh in my brain. Our main protagonist in Sorry Bro is a woman called Na. She's Armenian American, and she basically finds herself being proposed to by her long-term boyfriend. And in that moment, she realises that she does not want to be with him, so ends up rejecting his proposal. And then she goes back home, she still lives with her mum, and her mum basically pushes her into engaging more in her Armenian culture, something which Na has just never really done. She's never really been all that interested. So it's basically this thing called Explore Armenia, which is a few weeks of just like loads of events for the Armenian community in San Francisco. Na agrees to go to some just to basically get her mother to shut up. And at the very first event, she meets a woman called Erabuni. Na's always known that she's bisexual. It's not something she like keeps a secret from herself, but it's one of those things where she's like, I'm bisexual, I can just be with a man. It's never going to be a problem. I never have to come out. This is just a non-issue. And then obviously she meets Erabuni and she has these very strong feelings, and coming out is now a possibility that she has to face. Only in Armenian culture, that's not something that's going to go down all too well, or at least she doesn't think it is. This is just a really heartfelt rom-com. It's not the best book you're ever going to read in your life. I actually gave this about 3, maybe 3.5 stars. I did find that the characterization was a little bit off. Like, you don't actually learn all that much about Na or about Erabuni, but this is really, really detailed about the Armenian culture, which I just found so interesting. Like, when are you ever going to learn about Armenia? By reading this. I just really enjoyed that aspect of the book. And the bisexual relationship, I think Erabuni is also bisexual, is just also very, very cute. I just wanted more pining, you know? Like, they meet and they like talk about their feelings pretty quickly, which is like probably the healthy thing to do. I just like a bit of pining. I like a slow burn, you know? This is quite a fast burn. But regardless, bisexual representation, Armenian representation, which you literally never see, is a cute sapphic rom-com. I've been talking about this book online for years and years and years. Have I ever seen a single other person recommend or even mention this book? No, and it's baffling to me. This is Tin Man by Sarah Winman, and this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. If you liked Call Me By Your Name, the writing style in this is very, very similar, very descriptive in that way that Call Me By Your Name is. This is almost a love story, but like, this is real life. This isn't a nice fluffy story for the sake of the reader to make you feel good about yourself. This book depicts real life, all the love and loss and hurt and pain that comes with being a human and comes with having connections to other people. This is a story of 2 men whose hearts have just been like undeniably connected since the day they met when they were 12 years old. So you've got Ellis and Michael, they meet as young boys and they are just the best of friends. They hang out every single day and they just live life together. And then eventually a third person joins their group, and that is Annie. Over the years, Ellis and Michael's friendship grows into something more, but this is set in like the 1960s, 1970s, and they can't just admit their feelings for each other. They can't just walk out into the street holding hands. And so eventually it all kind of falls apart around them. One of the men, who is it who goes away? Wait. It's Michael. So eventually Michael moves away. It's too difficult for him to be around Ellis. Also, it's very clear that Ellis and Annie also have this undeniable connection. Michael just can't deal with it, so he moves away and their friendship basically falls apart. And then in 1996, they all come back together. But you follow their stories in the years they're apart, the narration sort of switching between Ellis and Michael, and they both led very, very different lives. And I don't want to spoil anything and tell you what eventually caused them to come back together and how that all comes about. But this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my entire life, and I just want to scream about it from the rooftops. Nobody's ever read it. It's literally about 200 pages long. If you read any of the books I'm mentioning in this video, this one, please. Then we have Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers, another one which I am shocked that I don't see many people talking about. I watch so many like sapphic book recommendation videos on TikTok. It's basically my entire feed. That and Taylor Swift Eras Tour, obviously. Nobody ever mentions this, and I don't know if it's because people have read it and they just don't like it, or if people just haven't heard about it. I'm here to tell you this is a really cute book. So in this book you've got Grace Porter. She has just completed her PhD in astronomy, and Grace Porter's always been the kind of girl who's had a plan. She knows what she's doing for her entire life. She's going to go to school, then she's going to do this, then she's going to do this, and she's going to get her PhD, and she's going to be an astronomer. And then she gets her PhD and suddenly she's like, well, what the hell do I do now? So as any woman in her mid to late 20s would do, she just gets really, really, really drunk in Vegas, and then she wakes up the next morning with a random woman in her bed and she's married. Her now wife is a woman called Yuki, and she is like kind of the opposite of Grace in every way. She lives a very free life. She presents her own radio show. She lives in New York compared to Grace living in Portland in Oregon. So they're literally completely opposite people living on opposite sides of the country, opposite personalities. And Yuki basically says to Grace, when you're ready, here's my address, come and find me. And so Grace goes on this sort of journey of self-discovery and eventually goes to find Yuki to see if their relationship will work. And it's just cute. There's no like drama in this book around coming out. There's no queer trauma. There's no rejection by family members. There's no religious trauma. There's like none of that. Like Grace is out, Yuki is out, and that's all good. That's all dandy. It's just a lesbian woman going on a journey of self-discovery and figuring out who she is in this world. And as somebody in her late 20s who has been through a lot of the stuff that Grace has been through, I could really, really relate to this book. And I was Grace at some point, she was me. It was just, I think reading it through the eyes of somebody who's like in that same era of life, maybe that's why I don't really see it recommended. There's not very many older book talkers, I'm not gonna lie to you. But yeah, I love this book. And then finally, if any of the books I mention in this video are going to be like controversial, if people are going to be like, of course we've heard of that book, it's probably going to be this one. But I wanted to mention this because I've seen a lot of people talking about My Policeman, the movie, featuring Harry Styles as the policeman. I haven't seen many people talking about the book, and I had never even heard of this book before the movie was released. And I actually ended up reading this book on the back of wanting to see the movie. So here's again a sign, if you've heard of the movie but you haven't heard of the book, read the book first. In what I suppose is a complete juxtaposition to what I was just saying about Honey Girl, this book, My Policeman, is queer trauma. This book is queer trauma in book form. This is not an easy read. If you don't want something heavy, this is not the one for you. This is historical fiction. It's set in 1950s in Brighton here in the UK when homosexuality was illegal. In a time when it was just much safer for a gay man to just marry a woman, and that's what most gay men did. And as you can imagine, that led to a world of pain for both people involved in that. So the main character in this is Tom. He is the policeman, and Tom ends up married to Marion, who is the friend of his sister. And Marion's always been obsessed with Tom. She's like always been in love with him as long as she can remember. Tom was always quite indifferent, but eventually he wears down. He's like, fine, I'll marry you. But Tom, of course, isn't interested in Marion. He is gay. He is deeply in love with a man called Patrick, who he just can't be with. And this book is sort of split into two timelines. So you've got the 1950s where Tom and Marion are first together, their sort of like relationship, their marriage, and Tom having the affair with Patrick. And then you've got the modern day timeline where Tom and Marion are still together all those decades later. They are still just sort of chugging along in their marriage. And then one day Marion decides to start caring for Patrick, who has recently had a stroke, and he just can't really care for himself at all. And Tom is not happy with this at all. He refuses to have anything to do with Patrick. And in My Policeman, you're kind of piecing together what happened in all those years. How did their relationship turn from this to this? This is so traumatic. This is such a difficult read. I cried so much. But I think it's really important because this is history. This happened. This was the reality for so many people. The Guardian's review on the back reads, a humane and evocative portrait of a time where lives were destroyed by intolerance. And I think that kind of sums it up. So there you go. We have a real mixed bag of recommendations there. Oh, that went really well, didn't it? So hopefully there's something in those recommendations for everyone. If you've ever read any of these before and have your own thoughts and opinions, let me know in the comments down below. Again, if you have any recommendations for books featuring transgender characters, gender non-conforming people, non-binary people of any kind, I'm really wanting to like read more about that experience, but there's not many books out there as far as I've been able to find, but I'm happy to have your recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one, I suppose. Bye guys.